Good day, everybody. This video is about a very mysterious date in history. If you could single out one date in history that is more important or more mysterious than any other date, would you find such a date? And if so, which date would that be? First, I want to look at a couple of people in history. And the first person I'm going to look at is Robert Chambers. In this very year, Robert Chambers published The Vestiges of Natural History of Creation. This work laid the foundation for the theory of evolution. Even Darwin, who disagreed with Robert, acknowledged his work. Now, if you think of the theory of evolution, would you regard this as a significant theory in history, especially history of Christianity as such? But if you look at history, would you regard this as a very important date? Next person we want to look at is Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin, of course, worked from the work of Robert Chambers, but his whole research ended in this year. It began in 1833 and ended in this year, where he studied the Galapagos Islands, and then he finished his work, and his first publication came out in this very year, and his first book also followed shortly after that, and the well-known book Origin of Species came a few years later. Would you regard his work as significant for modern times? Next person I want to look at is Karl Marx. His influence in the world is, of course, well known, and in this year he first published his work on his economy. But the important thing that happened this year is he met Friedrich Engels, whom had a very, very big influence on his life. And they became lifelong friends and partners, and his biggest influence in all his work came from this guy. They together published their first book in this year and laid the foundation for what we know as communism. And of course, if you don't think communism has made a big impact in the world, well, then think again. The next person we want to look at is Mazzini and Nietzsche. These two people had a huge impact as well in history. During this year, Mazzini formulated the whole basis for fascism. He worked on it for a couple of years, but this was a very important year. He became quite popular, especially in England in this year, after a post office revolt, or a scandal rather, not a revolt. He was involved in revolts in Italy, and that's why he lived in England, because he was exiled from Italy. But what he did laid the foundation for future politics in Italy. In the same year, Friedrich Nietzsche was born, and he later expounded on the theory or this whole system of fascism. Even though fascism was actually the preferred type of government throughout the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, Friedrich basically set the foundation for this, basically working on the work of Mazzini, which, by the way, was part of the Illuminati, who was created by the Jesuits from the Roman Catholic Church. So you can understand the link to fascism that came about. And then, of course, further on in history, what happened from fascism? We had Nazism that came from that, because the whole regime of Hitler was a fascistic regime, as well as the Italian Mussolini, and both of them were fascists. Would you think fascism was important in the last 200 years? I would say it is still making a huge, huge impact. Even today, you'll see the impact of that as government and business is coming closer to each other and forming partnerships, because basically fascism is where business and government is coming together and forming partnerships. Then we look further at the Fox sisters. The Fox sisters in this year heard rappings, and then they made up this whole thing about spiritualism, sitting at a table, listening to spirits, something that is well known these days. It was later shown to be a completely made up thing by them, but they became mediums and extremely popular. After 2 years of this, they published their first book, and it became a very popular movement. The bottom line is, this was the foundation of modern spiritualism, was with these sisters, and it was in this year that it began. It also opened up and made the Eastern religions more popular amongst the Western countries, especially in the USA, and that brought in the whole thing that different religions can mix together, setting the foundation again not only for spiritualism but also for modern day New Age. During this time, feminism had an extremely strong movement as well. They were growing. This is a very big study because feminism actually goes back quite far, but during this time quite a few hearings and things took place, and feminism became very prominent, not just as such in this year, but during this whole period of time. So feminism was coming up, and feminism was also the basis of philosophy, which the later LGBTQ movement has built on. Then somebody, Charles FENERTY, quite an interesting person. He was able to develop the making of paper from wood pulp, and before this year they made paper from old clothes, cotton, things like that, which made it a bit more expensive than what we would be used to today as well. You cannot have such bulk publications just going by that. This changed the world in a big way, since you could now produce paper products, even something stupid like toilet paper would now be easily produced by using cheaper paper, much cheaper paper. Pamphlet distribution, people will not those years use pamphlets readily. It would still be quite expensive to do it. Even though they did, it was not on the scale you see today. Maybe some would say, oh gosh, that's a bad thing, but in the end the spread of information via paper became cheap and affordable. Publications became cheap, and you could do that in a bulk scale. The next person, Samuel Morse, we know him from Morse code, but more importantly the telegraph machine, which he developed in this year, and the first telegram was sent March 24 of this year with the words, "What has God wrought?" Now, I think of all the things that happened, technological advances in the last 200 years, this was probably the most important technological advance that has ever come across the world, because all of a sudden the world shrunk. It became smaller. You no longer had to wait weeks or even months for a letter to come from another country. You could just send a telegram, and within a few days or even the same day you could get an answer and get information. Newspapers, everything changed. You could send information. This revolutionized communication in the world, and communication is the basis of development. You need that. Without that, things takes too long. And when things take too long, things just go backward. Now anyway, this changed the world in such a big way and paved the way even for what we have today, the internet. This is, you can say, the embryo of the internet and any other electronic communication, email. Just think of it. Everything goes back to the roots of this. And again, I ask the question, would you say this is a significant development? Now, apart from telegrams, I'm going to go to Charles Goodyear. We all know Goodyear tires, but Charles Goodyear patented the vulcanization of rubber, where they take latex, raw latex, and convert it into strong, robust, and hard rubber, which can be used for tires, but so many other things. If you take rubber out of the society today, things would just collapse. Because even modern day tires still use natural rubber, but the whole vulcanization process is not limited to just natural rubber. You'll find this even in the synthetic market. The same principles are still used. Just think of trying to make a car without rubber. I'm not even talking just about the tires, but all the rubber seals that you have in an engine, and even the doors, that you close a door and you don't have wind leaking in through the doors. This is a huge invention. And guess when this happened? In this very same year. Try to think of landing an airplane without having rubber. Try and land an airplane, or even just take off with an airplane without having the rubber wheels. It's completely essential for today. Extremely significant and important development. Then we go to a guy called the Swede Gustav Brick Pasch, developed the modern match as we know it. At that stage, they still used phosphorus, which was very dangerous to use and actually caused quite a few deaths from fires, etc. But this made, even though it's something small, it made a big impact on technology. You must remember at that stage people still used wooden fires and such. Electricity was not used for lighting until a lot later on with Edison, etc. Now I want to look at somebody that hasn't made such a huge impact in the world, but still did. Joseph Smith. He founded the Mormon Church, or the Latter-day Saints, and he was assassinated in this year. And Young followed up, and he changed the movement, and it was sent in a new direction. Why this is important to me is that although it's not a huge impact in the world, or more specifically Christianity, it is still a cult that is growing quickly. At one stage, it was the fastest growing church or church group or cult in the USA. Looking at the Baha'i faith, they began in this year. One of the few things that I'm mentioning today that was actually built upon specifically recognizing this very year as important, and they used the Bible to state and base their whole belief system on. But even though it was taken from the Bible, it's an Islamic sect. And what they did is they mixed different religions together with each other. And in a sense, you could say them together with a spiritualist were the base or the foundation for the New Age movement, which is so popular today. The YMCA has made a lot of impacts in the Christian world throughout the history, and they were organized and founded in this very year. And although I cannot say that it was groundbreaking, they are still extremely effective and active in the world. Another thing that made an impact in the world especially in the Christian world, was the discovery of the Codex Sinaiticus, which is a biblical manuscript, which is taken to be the oldest compilation of biblical texts, or almost complete Bible, which had a huge impact in Christian circles. Now the question is, of course, if it was a good impact or a bad impact. It was not a very good text. It had many errors. It was actually discovered in a dustbin, in a place where people throw things away. It was not in a good condition. It's scratched out. It's actually a terrible manuscript, but it became the basis of most modern translations, even translations that seem to be not modern, like the New King James has many references to actually rather using what's in this manuscript. So this manuscript caused quite a bit of division within Christian circles, especially on the Bible. The Jehovah's Witnesses Bible was also in a great sense based on this, especially because this codex, this manuscript, does not always bring out the fact that Jesus was divine. So that made a big impact in Christian circles. The main text in the Bible that gives the impression that Jesus was divine is in many cases just completely missing in this document. So a very important thing in history, this document. I'm looking at another person, John Nelson Darby. He was a theologian. He was influenced by Edwin Irving, who was in part influenced by the Jesuit, whom is of course Roman Catholics, the Jesuit Manuel Lacunza, who worked under the name Rabbi Ben Ezra to give the impression as if he was a Jew that got converted. And his work was translated by Edwin Irving, and Edwin Irving had a prophetess called Margaret MacDonald, and she impressed John Nelson Darby quite a bit with all her prophecies, and he gobbled up everything that Edwin Irving taught. Edwin Irving in many circles would be regarded as the beginning of Pentecostalism principles. Many might disagree with me on that. The main roots of Pentecostalism goes back to about 1901, but these principles were still built upon what came from Edwin Irving, and especially John Nelson Darby. What's very important about him is that he penned down the theology of the rapture in this very year, as well as dispensationalism. Now, most people won't know what dispensationalism is, yet about 90% of Christianity has converted to the teaching of dispensationalism, which comes from John Nelson Darby's pen. And this is important because it's actually based on the work of Lacunza. Now, the whole thing about this theology, it also came on the futurist theology of Ribera, which was also a Jesuit. By the way, the Jesuit organization or order was created by the Roman Catholic Church in 1535 to combat Protestantism. They needed an answer towards Protestant theology, especially concerning end times and Antichrist, and for that reason the Jesuit order was brought about, and their main task is to destroy Protestantism. So in 1585 the whole theology of futurism was developed by Ribera, but it sort of disappeared into the background. But with Edwin Irving and the theology of Lacunza, it was grabbed onto, especially because of the great disappointment that also came in this year, and I'll explain a bit later about that. And because of that great disappointment, people no longer trusted the Bible's, the old way of looking, the old Protestant way of looking at the Bible, the way people were used to understand the Bible as we would now understand it, as the historic method or historicism, where you would understand that prophecy were being fulfilled throughout history as history was going on. Now that was being discarded in this year, and in this very same year he penned down this dispensationalism, and eventually this became the main method of understanding the Bible throughout Christianity. What makes him especially important concerning his teachings is that it also influenced Christian Zionism, which was basically built entirely on his work together with Lacunza's work. That became the basis of the whole idea of the rapture, and the Left Behind books you'll find is very popular, all based on this theology. But the main thing that's important for us to understand today, of course, is the movement towards Israel, the whole thing of Israel being fulfilled in history, in specifically in prophetic history, and that there has to be a temple that needs to be rebuilt. And even the very term Messianic Jew is a dispensationalist term that you don't really find connected to anything in the Bible. All these things that you hear about rapture, 7-year tribulation, all those things are built upon his theology. And when was it penned down? First, 1844, and that's the date we are working on. So from now on you'll understand that date, which is quite important for the person by the name of William Miller. He predicted that in this year Jesus would come back. He looked at the Bible in Daniel 8 verse 14, and from that he understood it to be this very year. And of course, as we know it, Jesus didn't come back, and that's why we have the great disappointment. That's why it was called, because the people really expected Jesus to come back, and then he didn't. It was a huge movement. In the USA there was about 500,000 people following this movement. People were excited for Jesus coming back, which then of course he did not. William Miller set several more dates after this, expecting Jesus to still come, but most of the people left the movement. There was only about 50 that was left, and from this 50 you had two separate movements that came out. The one followed after William Miller, and another group came together and followed after the whole idea that this date had some meaning. From the Millerites you had a separate group. I'll mention them now again. But now, looking at the people that thought this date was still very important, something very important happened, and that is that a guy by the name of Hiram Edson, he saw a vision which explained to him that the cleansing of the sanctuary, as the verse states, nowhere in the Bible actually mentions that the earth is ever the sanctuary. So in this vision he had a different interpretation of what this prophecy meant, and this made the people excited and gave them enthusiasm to understand that something important did happen. And in this very year, this lady Ellen G. White saw her first vision, and that really encouraged the believers as well. They also began to understand that God is calling them to keep all the commandments of God through the power of God, and this included the fourth commandment, which states that we need to keep the Sabbath, which is Saturday, not Sunday. And this whole movement then became known as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That only became the official name and organization in 1863, quite a few years later. Now, this year, this is the date, but of all the groups and events that I've mentioned, only 3 actually have this date to be important to them. And it's the Baha'i, the Adventist, and the Seventh-day Adventist. So my question now is, do any of these 3 have any truth, or are these just coincidences? Did all these things just happen in this year by accident, by coincidence? I just want to quickly go through a recap so that we can understand the significance of what happened. And this year, the theory of evolution as its foundation. Karl Marx, not only teaching socialism and communism, but teaching that God does not exist, God is even dead, as Lenin later stated. And if you think Karl Marx and evolution both starting in the same date, both of them denying the existence of God, and Marx even relying on Darwinism as such. Mazzini and Nietzsche, fascism. Even today you'll see with this whole crisis in the world that the government is buying out companies. Okay, it's via the Reserve Bank, which is a private organization, but they're all working together. And basically, through the central bank, they are bailing out people. And by bailing out, they're buying the debt. And soon you'll find that government and companies will be coming to working together in a fascist manner. Even now, the government of the US has said that they are contemplating buying the oil companies or taking over a stake in the oil companies, and that's becoming fascism all over again. Then, of course, spiritualism. If you think in Christianity, the effect of spiritualism, not only from outside, but also from inside. The spiritualistic ideas that has come into the church, that it's all about feeling and experience and all these things, that theology that is not from the Bible, but from external influences, that becomes more important than the Bible, the basis from spiritualism. We're looking at the Mormons that began in this year, and actually where Joseph was murdered. And then Baha'i and the New Age type religions. Baha'i is quite a strong movement, especially amongst the super rich people. Then, of course, the Codex Sinaiticus and the new translations. This has made such a big impact in the world that most Christians won't even realize how important this was. And dispensationalism, if you look at the influence of Christianity, there's absolutely no other theology in the history that made such a big impact as the impact of dispensationalism from Darby, as well as Zionism. I want to look at a couple of things that I see as being positive as well. The telegram, it completely revolutionized the world, as I've already mentioned. Paper from wood, making paper cheap and easy to spread the gospel, to spread the message, and to let people know what's going on in the world. Rubber, communication through deliveries, etc. But also, of course, the fact that you can travel. If you want to do any missionary work without rubber, it would be very difficult to go far places and go into many places, because rubber just completely changed the transport world. Matches, that didn't make such a big impact to us now, but in the beginning of this time, it for sure did make a big difference. And then the YMCA made a big difference as well. It was positive in Christianity. Looking at William Miller and the Adventists, they brought people to search for Jesus, to bring a new search for God, to really make an effort to get their lives ready for God. The negative part, of course, there was a huge negative part. He never stopped searching for dates. And mostly the Adventists you'll find that what actually happened with them is many of them believed that Jesus did come in 1844, but it was in a spiritual sense, much in the same way as the Jehovah's Witnesses believe today. And then, of course, we have E.G. White and the Seventh-day Adventists, and you'll find that so many people fight, of course, would say that some people would even say she was a witch, or she was guided through evil spirits and things like that. You'll see interesting websites, and so many websites that really just fight her. So, but I'm not going to go into that. These are the events that took place. And now the question is, do any of these people, especially those three I mentioned, are there any truth to that? Do any of them know what's going on? Now, the Baha'i is an Islamic religion who mixes different types of religion, bringing syncretism. So now the question is, what is truth? What is truth? The big question always is, what is truth? If everybody is right, what is wrong? You cannot mix all that together. The first Adventists, the followers that stayed with Miller and did not accept the other movement's interpretation, there's about 25,000 left of them today, but this was, I think, 2005, 2006 census, so it's a long time ago. We're not sure. There are not so many of them left anymore, and I've read quite a few things about them, that they struggle with identity, to know really what's their message. Can they still say Jesus is coming soon after so many years? So there's quite an issue. If we look at the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they are about 20 million strong today. Quite a strong church, represented in about 108 countries in the world, so they're worldwide, with their own set of issues here and there, but they still keep holding strong to the message of the pioneers, and they also greatly revere the messages that came from the pen of E.G. White. So these believers are quite strong, and they still teach that Jesus is coming back soon, and maybe this is a message that is quite prominent for our time, especially in the crisis in the world. But the main thing is, if this date is an important date, if this date is in fact something that you can say, okay, this is significant. These things that happened are not by chance. It is significant what happened. If this is so, then we need to make a decision. One of these three parties involved in this date has the truth, and it's for you to decide who. I personally know that this date is important. We can make more studies, and you can tell me as well what you think about it, and you can, of course, have your opinion. Personally, I believe this date is not coincidental. So many things. If you think of the main three things that influenced Christianity: evolution, spiritualism, communism. Those were the three, shall I say, secularistic influences that completely, almost destroyed Christianity in many places. If you look at what's going on in Europe, it's completely secularized. Why? Because of these three influences. They completely, in a sense, destroyed Christianity. And when did they begin? When did they begin? 1844. And then, of course, theologically, within the churches, the two biggest influences was dispensationalism, which changed Christianity in a huge way. It was also the foundation of modern day antinomianism, which basically tells you that the Old Testament no longer applies, and we only work with the New Testament. the whole idea of dispensations, which just means a time period set apart. The main thing is, of course, there was time periods, but for them it's the Old Testament is finished. We work just with the New Testament, and it's all part of dispensationalism. So that movement had a huge impact in Christianity. The Codex Sinaiticus, which changed the Bible, which is the foundation of faith for Christians. It used to be anyway. And all these things and questions it brought about caused quite a bit of confusion in churches. And you'll find so many pastors and reverends who would just fight tooth and nail to say that Codex Sinaiticus is the most authentic text in the world. Do you think these things are just coincidence? You make the decision and let me know. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching this video. Let us just pray together. Thank you, Lord, that we know that in history, you are part of history. You are not surprised by things that are happening in history. And we ask, God, that you'll lead every one of us to understand exactly what is going on in the world, what is going on in this hectic time of the world's history, and show us also our place in history, where we fit in. And even though people might differ concerning these events, we at least know one thing. This time we really need you. We ask, God, that you'll bless us and lead us in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Again, thank you for watching this video. Please share it with people that they can understand what's going on, and then you're welcome to give criticism and let me know what you think. Thank you very much.